The city moved like a river of noise and light, cars honking, people rushing, street vendors shouting, and tall buildings shining against the afternoon sun as the billionaire stepped out of his black luxury car. The kind of car that made everyone stop and whisper because everyone knew who he was. A man known for his cold eyes, sharp suits, and the kind of power that could silence a room without a single word. He adjusted his coat, lifted his chin, and walked through the crowd while people moved aside as if an invisible shield pushed them back. But in the middle of that movement, in the middle of the whispers and curious eyes, one girl in an oversized gray hoodie walked straight toward him, her head down, her steps fast, and before he could even process what was happening, she bumped into him hard enough to almost knock his phone from his hand, and he turned to scold her. But she didn't even look at him. She just muttered a sorry in a shaking voice and hurried away. He almost ignored it, almost continued walking, but something felt off. Something inside him whispered that she didn't bump him by mistake, and when he casually touched his coat pocket out of habit, the world around him seemed to stop because his wallet, the one he never lost, the one he kept close, was gone. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and for a second, the billionaire felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure anger mixed with disbelief. And when he looked up, he saw her already slipping into the thick crowd, pushing past people like her life depended on it. And he didn't even think before he went after her. People turned with shock as they saw a billionaire chasing someone on foot, dodging cars, pushing through groups, almost slipping over newspaper stands, and the girl moved like someone who had run many times before. She didn't look back at first, but when she finally did, her eyes didn't show guilt or victory. They showed something far deeper, something cold and broken: fear. Not the fear of being caught stealing, but the fear of something behind her, something chasing her long before he ever did. That look confused him more than the missing wallet, because thieves usually looked proud or smug or desperate, but she looked terrified, as if shadows were pulling at her from every corner. She turned into a narrow alley, her steps echoing on the wet ground, and he followed, telling himself he only wanted his wallet, but feeling a strange pull in his chest that he couldn't explain. The alley opened into a small market with food stalls, smoke rising from grills, children running, and vendors yelling prices, and she darted through them, nearly knocking over a table of oranges while he followed her. Breathing hard not because he was tired but because something strange was happening inside him. Something that made him want to understand why a girl would steal yet look like she wanted to cry while doing it. She jumped over a stray dog, turned a corner, and crossed a busy road so quickly that cars screeched, horns screamed, and drivers cursed at both of them, and the billionaire barely avoided a motorcycle while chasing her. When she reached an old abandoned building covered in graffiti and broken windows, she slipped inside like she had been here before. Like this was her hiding place, and he stepped in a few seconds later, feeling the sudden silence hit his ears like a wall. The air smelled like dust and old memories, the floor creaked with every step, and sunlight came in through holes in the walls, making long shadows dance around them. He listened carefully, expecting her footsteps, and when he followed the sound into a large empty room, he froze because he heard her whispering. But when he looked around, she was alone, standing in a corner with her face buried in her hands, whispering fast and shaking like she was talking to someone who wasn't there. He moved closer, confused, and before he could speak, she turned around with a sharp gasp, her eyes wide with panic, and she screamed, stumbling back, pressing herself against the wall like he was a monster. She tried to cover her hands behind her back, as if hiding something, but her whole body trembled so violently that he took a step back himself, shocked not by her fear but by how deep and raw it was. She looked like someone who had run for days, someone who hadn't eaten, someone who didn't know safety anymore, and when he saw her face clearly, he noticed dirt smudged across her cheek, old tears dried on her skin, and fresh tears forming again. The billionaire expected a thief to curse him, lie to him, try to escape, but she didn't do any of that. She looked like a trapped animal that expected to be hurt, and that alone made his breath catch because no thief should be this scared just for being caught. Something was very wrong, something deeper than a stolen wallet, something that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with survival. He demanded his wallet back, but his voice didn't come out as strong as he expected, because the moment she moved her hands out from behind her back, they shook so violently that he wondered how she even ran. Her fingers trembled like leaves in a storm. Her wrists looked bruised, not from today but from days or weeks of something terrible. Her breath came out in broken gasps, and she kept looking behind him, into the empty hallway, like someone was about to walk through the door. The billionaire swallowed hard, suddenly feeling a knot in his chest he didn't understand, and he watched as she reached into her hoodie pocket with shaky fingers and pulled out his wallet, throwing it toward him like she couldn't bear to hold it. It fell at his feet, and she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I had to." Her voice cracked, and she looked like she was about to fall, but she forced herself to stand straight, eyes flicking between him and the door, breath short and broken. He didn't move. He couldn't, because he had chased thieves, liars, scammers, and enemies before, but none of them ever looked like this. Like they weren't running from him at all, but from an entire world that wanted to break them. She stepped sideways, ready to run again, but her foot slipped on broken tiles, and she hit the floor hard, wincing in pain while struggling to get up again. She didn't plead for mercy, didn't bargain, didn't fight. She just kept whispering, "Please, I can't go back. Please." And the billionaire felt a chill run down his spine. He slowly bent down to pick up his wallet, but his eyes never left her face because he suddenly knew one thing with absolute certainty. This girl wasn't a criminal. She wasn't a pickpocket. She wasn't a street thief. She was something else entirely. Something hurting, something hiding, something broken in a way he couldn't understand yet. And the shaking of her hands, the terror in her eyes, the whispers toward empty corners of the room. They all pointed to one truth, a truth that made the billionaire's heart beat faster in confusion and fear. She didn't steal because she wanted money. She stole because she was desperate. She stole because she was running. And whatever she was running from was far worse than anything he had imagined when he first started chasing her. And in the dim light of that abandoned building, with dust floating like ghosts around them, the billionaire realized that this moment, this strange chase, this stolen wallet, was only the beginning of a story he couldn't walk away from anymore. He didn't understand why the girl looked at him like he was another danger in her life, but when he stepped closer to help her stand, she jerked away so fast that her back hit the wall and she covered her face with her arms like she expected a blow. And the billionaire froze because he had never seen anyone react to him this way, not even people who hated him. And when she slowly lowered her arms, her eyes were glossy with fear that didn't belong to someone who stole a wallet. It belonged to someone who had been hurt over and over again until fear became her only language. She whispered something he didn't catch the first time, so he leaned a little closer, speaking softly, but she shook her head and repeated it, voice breaking apart like paper soaked in water. "Please, don't send me back. Please, I'll do anything, just not back." Those words hit him harder than he expected, leaving an ache in his chest that he didn't want to feel but couldn't ignore, and he stared at her, confused, trying to understand what back even meant. She wasn't scared of the police. She was scared of something much darker. He wanted answers, but every time he tried to ask, she pressed herself tighter into the corner like she wanted to disappear into the wall. He told her he just wanted to talk, nothing more, but she kept shaking her head, whispering apologies for stealing, apologizing for running, apologizing for breathing, apologizing for taking space as if her existence needed permission, and the billionaire felt something twist painfully inside him because he had never seen someone so young carry so much fear. He crouched down, keeping distance, speaking slowly like he was talking to someone on the edge of a cliff, and finally she lifted her eyes, those tired, broken eyes, and he saw exhaustion so deep it looked like her spirit was bruised. He asked why she took his wallet, and for a moment she pressed her lips together, refusing, until her shoulders dropped and she whispered, "I needed money for food." Not for me, for him. The billionaire frowned, unsure who him was, and when he quietly asked, she hugged her shaking arms around herself and murmured, "My little brother." She fumbled with her hoodie pocket and pulled out a small photo, edges torn, colors fading, showing a boy maybe 7 or 8 years old, smiling with innocence she didn't carry anymore, and she held that photo like it was the only thing holding her together. He reached out, slow and gentle, asking if he could see it, and after hesitating, she let him, her fingers trembling even after letting go. When he flipped the photo, a short note was written in messy handwriting. "Find a safe home." His breath caught in his throat. She tried to snatch the picture back then, terrified of what he might think, but he gave it to her without a fight, watching how she pressed it against her chest as if protecting it from the world. He asked where the boy was now, but she instantly shook her head, eyes wide and terrified again, whispering, "They'll find me if I say it. They'll find him too. Please don't make me say it." Her voice cracked again, and she slid down the wall until she sat on the dirty floor, pulling her knees into her chest, rocking slightly like someone trying to calm their own storm. The billionaire stood there, feeling heavier by the second, because he came here for a stolen wallet. But now he felt like he had stepped into a nightmare he didn't understand, a nightmare she had been living alone. He noticed then that her wrists were not just bruised. They had small red marks, fresh and painful looking, like someone had grabbed her too hard or tied something around her recently. He swallowed hard, trying to hide his shock because he didn't want to scare her more, and gently told her he wasn't there to hurt her or send her anywhere. But her eyes were full of disbelief. She whispered that people like him always helped them, never people like her, and that sentence hit him like a punch because he realized she didn't trust him. Not because of who he was, but because of the world she had survived. He asked who they were, gently, but she immediately covered her ears, shaking her head violently, mumbling that if she said their name, they would appear, that they always appeared, that they always took her back, and the billionaire realized she was not just scared. She was traumatized. She stood up suddenly, stumbling a little, gripping the wall for support, and she tried to run again, but her legs gave out halfway across the room. He rushed to steady her, and she didn't fight him this time. She just sagged into his arms like she was too tired to pretend she wasn't breaking. He helped her sit again, but she didn't look at him, staring instead at the empty doorframe with the same fear she had shown in the streets, and he followed her gaze, half expecting someone to walk in, someone who haunted her steps. He gently asked her again why she thought he would send her back, and after a long silence, she whispered, "Because rich people always work with them. They run everything. They own everything. They own us." Her voice trembled on the last word, and the billionaire felt something inside him fracture, something cold and guilt-heavy, because he didn't know what she had lived through, but he knew it was nothing any human should face. He wanted to tell her she was safe, that he would help, but the words got stuck in his throat, because he didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he told her he just wanted to understand, but she only shook her head again, murmuring that if she stayed too long, if she talked too much, if she made noise, they would find her. The billionaire watched her, watched every tremble, every heavy breath, every tear she wiped quickly like she didn't have the right to cry, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than ambition, anger, or pride. He felt helplessness, and something else too, a responsibility he didn't ask for but couldn't walk away from anymore. Because he didn't know who they were. He didn't know why her brother needed saving. He didn't know what broken world she escaped from. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of the people coming for her. And whatever they had done to her, whatever they had taken from her, whatever they still wanted. He could feel it in the air like a dark shadow crawling through the room. Something was coming. Something she had been running from for a long, painful time. And the billionaire, who had chased her for a wallet, now understood he had been pulled into something much bigger, something dangerous, something he couldn't ignore even if he wanted to. He didn't know how long they sat there in that broken room with dust floating silently around them like tiny ghosts, but every second felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, listening to her soft trembling. The billionaire watched her without blinking, trying to piece together the pieces of a life she clearly didn't want to talk about. But even in her silence he could see truth hiding behind every shake of her hands, behind every flinch, behind every quick glance at the door that made her shoulders stiffen like she expected someone to drag her out any moment. He wasn't used to feeling protective. His world was built on rules, numbers, power, and distance, but right now he felt something close to panic because he could see she was close to collapsing again. Not from fear of him, but from fear of something that lived inside her memories. He moved a little closer, slowly, making sure she saw every step so she didn't panic, and he tried once again to ask who she was running from, but she pressed her hands to her ears and whispered, "Please, please don't say their name. They hear everything." Her voice cracked, and he felt a painful squeeze in his chest, a feeling he didn't recognize but didn't push away. He told her he wouldn't say anything, just wanted to help, but she shook her head again, whispering, "No one helps us. No one ever helps people like us." And the way she said, "us," made him realize she wasn't just talking about herself and her brother. She was talking about a whole group of people trapped in a world he had never seen. She reached into her hoodie again, pulling out the torn photo and gripping it like her hands were the only shield she had left, rocking slightly as she whispered apologies to the boy in the picture. The billionaire leaned in gently and asked if her brother was safe, and the moment the question left his mouth, something in her face shattered. Her eyes widened, filling with tears instantly, and she shook her head so quickly he thought she might faint again. "No, he's not safe. He's still there," she whispered, voice barely holding together, and he felt a deep cold settle into his spine. She looked like she wanted to say more but couldn't, like the words were trapped behind walls built by fear and pain. When he quietly asked where there was, she hugged herself tighter, whispering, "A place we were taken to. A place where nobody comes out unless they are useful. A place where kids are treated like tools." He froze, not because he fully understood what she meant, but because the tone in her voice held no exaggeration, no drama, just truth, raw and aching. His heartbeat grew heavier, slower, like his body understood something his mind wasn't ready to accept. She lifted the photo again, her thumb sliding over her brother's face, and she whispered, "I promised him we would escape. I promised him I'd find help, but they caught me. They brought me back, and the second time was worse. Everything was worse." Her voice broke completely then, and she covered her mouth to stop the sob that escaped. But the billionaire saw it anyway, saw the pain she had been forcing down because she didn't have the luxury of breaking down before. He reached out a hand, not to grab her, not to force an answer, but simply to offer something. Comfort, safety, anything she would take. But she stared at it like she had never been offered a hand in her life. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and touched his hand with trembling fingers, as if she expected him to pull away. But when he didn't, she looked at him with confusion, almost disbelief. Nobody had touched her gently in a long time. She whispered, "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." And he didn't know how to answer because he didn't understand it himself. He only knew that something inside him refused to walk away. He finally said softly, "Because no one should be this scared." And when she heard that, a tear slid down her cheek, silent but full of years of hidden pain. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing hard like she was preparing herself for something. And when she opened them again, there was a different fear there, a fear of trusting him. But she forced herself to speak anyway. "I didn't want to steal. I swear I didn't, but I needed money. Because the last time I saw my brother, he told me he was hungry." Her voice broke again, and this time she didn't try to hide it. Her tears fell freely, sliding down her dirty cheeks, making her look even younger and more fragile. The billionaire felt something twist painfully inside him, guilt mixing with helplessness, and he told her they would figure something out. They would find her brother. They would stop whoever was hurting her. But she shook her head violently, almost angrily, whispering, "You can't. They're everywhere. They have people in hospitals, in shelters, in police. They took kids nobody would miss. Kids like us." The billionaire swallowed hard, his pulse thundering through his chest, because now her fear made sense. She wasn't running from a person. She was running from a system. She touched the bruises on her wrist unconsciously, flinching even from her own fingers, and he knew then that whatever she had escaped from had treated her like property. She had no reason to trust anyone, no reason to believe anyone could help her. But she looked at him now with a strange mix of fear and hope, as if she wanted to trust him but didn't know how. And he, for the first time in years, felt like his wealth, his power, his status. None of it mattered here. What mattered was the shaking girl in front of him who needed someone to believe her, someone to stand beside her, someone who wasn't part of the nightmare she had escaped. He swallowed and said quietly, "You're safe with me." And she looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies, for tricks, for hidden motives, but she found none. And for the first time since he met her, she let out a small, broken breath and whispered, "I hope that's true." But even as she said it, her eyes drifted to the doorway again, and a fresh wave of fear washed over her face like a dark shadow returning. The billionaire followed her gaze, his senses sharpening, because he felt it too. Something was coming. Something she had been running from for far too long. The billionaire felt her fear before he understood it. A cold wave that moved through the air like a warning, and when she stared toward the doorway with trembling eyes, he turned too, his heartbeat tightening as the building suddenly felt too silent, too dark, too full of hidden breaths. She pressed her back against the wall, whispering, "They're here. I know they're here." And every word shook like it was being ripped out of her chest. He wanted to tell her it was her imagination, that nobody had followed her, that she was safe, but even he didn't believe it, because the way her eyes widened, the way her breath stuttered, the way she curled inward like her body remembered 100 old punishments. It all told him she wasn't guessing. She was remembering how they always came. He gently reached out to calm her, but before he could even say a word, a soft echo floated down the hallway, the distant sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, searching. The billionaire's blood turned to ice. The girl grabbed his sleeve with both hands, her fingers digging into the fabric with desperate force, whispering, "Please don't let them take me. Please. They'll take me back. They'll take him too, please." Her voice was thin, shaking, barely holding together. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire felt fear not for himself but for someone else. Fear that came from a place he didn't even know existed inside him. He stood up quickly and pulled her behind a large broken pillar, pressing a finger to his lips to keep her silent. And she nodded, even though her whole body shook like it wanted to collapse. She clung to the back of his coat as if it was the only lifeline she had left. The footsteps came closer, echoing through the dust and emptiness. Two voices mixing quietly, cold with purpose. The billionaire peeked through a crack in the pillar and saw them. Two men in long black coats, tall, sharp-faced, eyes scanning every corner of the abandoned building like they were hunting an animal. They weren't strangers or random criminals. They moved like professionals, like people who had done this many times. The girl saw them too, and a small choking sound escaped her, and she covered her mouth quickly with both hands, tears streaming down faster now, dripping onto the dirty floor, her entire body shaking so violently that the billionaire gently pressed his hand against her back to steady her. It was the first time she didn't flinch at his touch. He listened to the men speak in low voices, their tone casual and cruel in the same breath. "She ran far this time," one said, checking a small device in his hand. "But she always leaves a trail. She'll be weak by now." The other laughed lightly, a sound that made the billionaire's stomach twist. "The boss is tired of her. If she fights again, we don't bring her back gentle." They kept walking deeper into the building, checking rooms, shining flashlights into corners where the girl had probably hidden countless times before. She closed her eyes tight, pressing her forehead against the pillar, whispering silently to herself like she was begging her heart to stay quiet. The billionaire leaned closer and whispered into her ear, "I won't let them take you." She shook her head, tears falling fast. "You don't know them. You don't know what they do. They don't stop. Once they want you, they don't stop. They have people everywhere, money everywhere." The billionaire took a slow breath, steadying both himself and her, because anger was boiling inside him now. Anger at what she had endured, anger at these men, anger that he lived in a world where kids like her were hunted like lost property. He watched the men move down the hall, and when they finally turned a corner, disappearing deeper inside the building, he grabbed her hand and whispered urgently, "We're leaving. Now." She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the place the men had vanished, as if she expected them to reappear instantly. But he tightened his hold just enough to show her he meant it. She nodded weakly. He guided her quietly across the room, every step slow and careful, so the broken glass wouldn't crunch beneath their feet. She walked like someone trying to outrun her own shadow, her breath shaking, her fingers gripping his hand with painful strength. When they reached the exit, she hesitated again, whispering, "They see everything. They know every place I run. There's no safe street left. He looked at her, really looked at her. The thin frame, the shaking shoulders, the bruises, the fear that had been stitched into her bones. And he felt something shift inside him, something heavy and fierce. He whispered, "You're with me now, and they don't get to touch you again." She stared at him, confused, scared. But there was a small flicker of hope in her eyes, a flicker she tried to hide because she had learned that hope was dangerous. They stepped outside, but before they could move far, a sharp voice echoed from the hallway behind them. "Found you." The girl froze instantly, her breath stopping completely, and the billionaire felt her hand crush his. He turned slowly, seeing one of the men standing in the doorway, his eyes cold and amused. The man began walking toward them, slow steps like a predator closing in on prey. The billionaire stepped in front of the girl without thinking, his body blocking her from the man's view. The man's smirk widened. "You're not part of this. Move." The billionaire didn't move. He stood tall, shoulders straight, eyes sharp with a coldness the girl had never seen before. For the first time, he used the full power of his presence. The same presence that made boardrooms fall silent. The same presence that bent rivals to fear him. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, voice quiet but heavy enough to shake the air. The man paused, surprised at the resistance, then laughed lightly. "Oh, one of her saviors, huh? Thought she'd lost her charm." He stepped closer, reaching out a hand as if to push the billionaire aside. That was the moment something dark and fearless rose in the billionaire's chest. He grabbed the girl's hand tighter, pulling her behind him, and said in a tone that even made the man blink, "Touch her, and you'll regret it." The girl's knees nearly gave out behind him. Nobody had ever stood in front of her like this. Nobody had ever shielded her. Nobody had ever told these men no. The man's smile faded slowly. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." The billionaire locked eyes with him. "Neither do you." A long, tense silence filled the air, stretching like a wire ready to snap, and the girl pressed her forehead against the billionaire's back, her trembling easing just enough for her to breathe. For the first time since the chase began, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not a place, not a shelter, but a person standing between her and the nightmare she had run from. And as the man took a slow, threatening step closer, the billionaire realized something too. He wasn't protecting her out of guilt or pity. He was protecting her because something deep inside him refused to let her be taken again. She wasn't just a thief anymore. She was a human being who had survived the impossible, and now that he knew her truth, he would not let her fall back into darkness. The man took another step, and the billionaire made his choice. Whatever happened next, he wasn't backing down. The moment the man took another step toward them, something inside the billionaire snapped. Not in anger, but in a strange, protective way he never imagined he could feel for someone he met only hours ago. Yet the fear in the girl's eyes, the trembling in her hands, and the way she clung to the back of his coat like he was the last wall between her and hell turned something inside him into steel. He took a step forward, blocking her completely, and the man paused, confused by the billionaire's calm defiance. The girl whispered behind him, her voice breaking, "Please don't. They'll hurt you too. They always hurt everyone." And he felt her head press against his back, her fingers gripping tighter as if she expected him to leave her at any second. But he only whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." The man smirked again, amused by the billionaire's stance, and said, "Move aside. She's property. She belongs to us." That word, property, hit the billionaire like fire, burning deeper than any insult ever had. He took one more step closer, his jaw clenched, eyes colder than ice, and said quietly, "She belongs to no one." Something in the man's expression flickered, a moment of irritation mixing with caution, because he finally understood the billionaire wasn't bluffing. But he still didn't stop, still reached for the girl, still believed she was a thing to take. And that tiny movement made the billionaire move faster than he ever had in a boardroom or negotiation. He grabbed the girl's wrist and pulled her toward the exit, whispering urgently, "Run." She stumbled but ran beside him, fear giving speed to her tired legs. Behind them, the man cursed, shouting to his partner, "They're heading out! Block the main street!" The billionaire's pulse hammered as they sprinted through the broken doorway into the open street. The girl gasping for air, nearly tripping twice but holding on to him like her life depended on it. And it did. Cars rushed past, horns blaring, but he didn't stop. He yanked her across the road, ignoring the shouts, focusing only on getting her away from those men, away from the shadows reaching for her. When they reached the other side, the girl collapsed against a wall, panting violently, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks as she whispered, "They won't stop. They'll follow. They always follow." The billionaire knelt in front of her, holding her shaking shoulders, trying to catch her eyes, trying to ground her somehow. But she kept looking around like the monsters in her memories were about to climb out of the walls. He told her they needed to move, they needed to get far. But she shook her head, crying harder now. "You don't understand. They have cameras, watchers, informers. They know every place I hide. If they see us together, they'll hurt you. They'll take him too. They'll take my brother again." Her voice broke into sobs, and she covered her face, her body shaking uncontrollably from fear and exhaustion. The billionaire felt his heart twist painfully. Something so unfamiliar it made his throat tighten. He wasn't used to carrying this deeply, this fast, but seeing her like this made something inside him ache. He took her hand gently, lifting her chin so she would look at him, and said firmly, "You're safe with me. You're not alone anymore." She stared at him through tears, eyes filled with disbelief and hope fighting inside each other, as if she wanted to trust him, but years of pain chained her heart. He didn't push her. He simply held her hand until her breathing slowed enough for her legs to hold her again. When she stood, unsteady but a little stronger, he guided her toward his car, keeping his body between her and every corner, every shadow, every passerby, because now he no longer saw the girl who stole his wallet. He saw someone who had been hunted, hurt, broken, yet still trying to protect the one person she loved, her brother. As they reached the car, she hesitated, stepping back like she feared the car itself would betray her. "Cars scare me," she whispered in a small voice. "They used vans, dark vans. They tied us inside." Her breath caught, and she grabbed her chest, trying not to cry again. The billionaire softened his voice and said, "This car is yours now. No one will touch you here." She closed her eyes, wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve, and slowly nodded. He opened the back door gently, helping her inside, making sure she felt safe before stepping in himself. The car's doors closed with a soft click, and she flinched, her hand gripping the seatbelt tight, memories choking her. But he reached back and placed his hand over hers, still and warm, whispering, "You're safe. I promise." For the first time since he met her, she didn't pull her hand away. The engine started, and he drove into the city, weaving through traffic, not toward a hospital, not toward the police, not toward a public place. He knew she wouldn't survive that kind of exposure. Instead, he headed to his penthouse, a place with security systems that couldn't be tampered with, guards who didn't answer to criminals, cameras that watched the right people instead of the wrong ones. On the way, she stared out the window with wide, terrified eyes, asking every few minutes, "Are they following? Do you see them? Did they find us?" And each time he answered calmly, "No, you're safe." She didn't believe it, not fully, but she wanted to. That one alone told him how long she had lived without safety. When they finally reached the underground parking, she seemed overwhelmed, shaking as she stepped out of the car like she feared someone would drag her back. The billionaire walked beside her, not touching her but close enough that she felt protected. When the elevator doors closed around them, she pressed herself into the corner, whispering memories she couldn't shut out. How dark rooms felt like cages, how doors closing felt like traps, how the quiet made her skin crawl. But he spoke to her softly until she calmed enough to breathe. When they entered the penthouse, she froze completely. The large space, the warm lights, the quiet air. It was too much, too safe, too clean, too calm for someone whose world had never given her peace. She whispered, "I don't belong here," and he replied, You belong somewhere safe, and that's here. She hugged herself tightly, tears filling her eyes again, because nobody had ever said that to her before. As she stood there, trembling in the doorway of a home she didn't think she deserved, the billionaire finally understood the truth. She wasn't just running from men in coats. She was running from a world built to crush kids like her. And now that he knew, now that he had seen the truth in her tears, in her bruises, in her fear, he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever she had escaped, whatever had stolen her childhood, whatever had trapped her brother, he would tear it apart piece by piece, even if it meant going to war with the shadows she feared. The silence inside the penthouse felt heavy, almost unreal, like the air was protecting her from every sound the world had thrown at her before. But the girl stood near the doorway with her arms wrapped around her chest, shaking like she didn't know how to exist in a safe place, and the billionaire watched her carefully, noticing every tiny flinch, every terrified glance toward the windows, every moment she seemed ready to collapse under memories he couldn't see. He guided her to the couch slowly, keeping a respectful distance, gently inviting her to sit, and she obeyed with hesitating steps like she expected the floor to break beneath her. She touched the couch with her fingers, surprised by the softness, whispering, "I'm not supposed to be in places like this." And the billionaire knelt down so he could look into her frightened eyes and said, "You're supposed to be wherever you're safe." She blinked, stunned by words she never thought she'd hear. He brought her water and food, placing them on the table carefully, but she backed away, whispering, "I don't deserve this. You don't know what they made me do. You don't know what they forced us to do." And he froze, feeling a cold anger rise in his chest. Anger not at her, but at the people who had broken her so badly she couldn't accept kindness without fear. He sat on the floor near her feet, making himself small so she wouldn't feel pressured, and softly asked, "What did they make you do?" At first she didn't answer. She stared at the wall, eyes empty and distant, as if watching a nightmare replay. Her fingers twisted together, her breath shook, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked into painful pieces. "They took us, all of us, kids without parents, kids nobody asked about, and they made us work in their place. Clean, fetch, carry, watch, report. They said if we were useful, they'd let us sleep. If we weren't, they'd punish us." Her breath hitched, and she hugged her knees as if trying to shield herself from memories that clawed at her mind. "My brother, he tried to protect me. Even though he was younger, he always stepped in for me. He always took the blame, and one day they hurt him for it." A sob ripped out of her chest, raw and trembling, and she covered her face with her hands. The billionaire's hand tightened into a fist on the floor. She continued, voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "I wanted to take him away. I tried to escape once. I even got out, but they found me. They dragged me back. They beat him because I ran. They said if I ran again, they'd make him disappear." Her voice cracked into silence, and the billionaire felt something inside him shatter. She looked up at him suddenly, fear turning into desperation. "That's why I stole your wallet. I needed money to go back for him. To buy something. To get someone to help me sneak in. But everything went wrong and they found me again. I escaped again but... She shook violently, unable to finish. The billionaire reached out, placing his hand gently on hers. And this time she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him like she had been carrying a world too heavy for her thin shoulders and had finally found a place to rest, even if only for a moment. He whispered, "Where is he now?" She shook her head with hopeless eyes. "Still inside. I don't know if he's okay. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if he's alive." Her voice broke on the last word. He felt a deep, burning determination fill him. A fire that came from a place he didn't know existed in him, but it was strong enough to crush every other feeling. He stood up suddenly, the decision already forming in his mind. He would find her brother, no matter the cost. He walked to his desk, picked up his laptop, and started typing furiously. She watched him from the couch, confused and scared, whispering, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer immediately, scanning files, security reports, permits, foundations, everything that could help him understand who owned a place that operated in the shadows. But the more he searched, the stranger it became. Files were locked, documents erased, names hidden. Every trail ended in nothingness. He tried another route, calling his contacts one by one. But each time he mentioned the kind of facility she escaped from, every call was abruptly shut down. Some contacts hung up immediately. Some said, "I can't talk about this." Some whispered, "Stay away from it." And one even said, "If you value your life, forget that place exists." The billionaire stared at the screen, anger boiling through him. How could something this evil hide in a city full of laws, cameras, and power? He turned to her, frustration mixing with worry. "None of this makes sense," he muttered. "Someone powerful is protecting them." She nodded slowly, fear tightening her face again. "I told you, they have people everywhere," she whispered. "That's why I never asked for help. Nobody helps kids like us. Nobody wants to fight the people who run that place." He walked toward her, kneeling beside her again, and gently lifted her chin so she would look into his eyes. "I'm not nobody." She blinked, tears falling again. "But they'll come for you too. They'll destroy you like they destroyed everyone who tried to speak." He leaned closer, voice low and steady. "Let them try." She stared at him, stunned by the confidence in his voice, but before she could respond, the penthouse lights flickered once. Small, almost unnoticeable, but it made her gasp and grab his arm. "No, no, no, no. They found us. They always do. They always find me," she whispered in terror. He stood instantly, checking the security monitors, and when he saw one of the ground-level cameras glitch for half a second, his breath caught. Someone had tried to hack his system. Someone dangerous. Someone who wanted the girl back. He turned to her with urgency, but before he could speak, she whispered, voice trembling like a fragile thread. "I told you, nowhere is safe. Not even here. They're coming." And for the first time in years, the billionaire feared something too. Not for himself, but for the girl sitting on his couch, crying softly because she truly believed she could never escape the nightmare chasing her. He walked toward her slowly, sat next to her, and took her hand again. "Then we don't hide," he whispered. "We fight." She stared at him with wide eyes, broken, scared, but holding a small spark of hope she had been forcing herself to kill for years. And that tiny spark was enough for him to know he couldn't turn back now. Because saving her brother was no longer only her fight. It was his too. The girl held his hand tightly as if it was the only thing keeping her in this world, her breath trembling. Her eyes wide and full of fear as she stared at the flickering lights, convinced the shadows outside the windows were already crawling toward her. And the billionaire felt her shaking grow stronger, her fingers digging into his arm with desperate strength, whispering again and again, "They're coming, they're coming," while he tried to calm her, tried to tell her she was safe. But deep inside he felt the same cold warning spreading through his chest because that glitch on the security monitor was no accident. And he knew it. He stood and walked to the screens embedded in the wall, scanning every camera feed slowly, carefully, watching for movement. Nothing yet, but there was a tension in the air, a pressure that whispered danger even in the quiet. The girl stayed on the couch, curled into herself, clutching her sleeves like she wanted to disappear inside them, trembling so much he worried she would faint again. When he turned back toward her, she whispered in a small, broken voice, "I'm sorry. I never should have taken your wallet. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. They ruin everything they touch." He walked back to her quickly, knelt in front of her, and took her shaking hands gently, forcing her to look at him. "You didn't drag me," he said softly. "You survived, you fought, and you came to the only person who chased you instead of ignoring you. I'm here because I chose to stay." She blinked, tears blurring her vision, whispering, "Nobody stays, everyone leaves. They always leave when they find out the truth about us." He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, and she didn't flinch, an act of trust she didn't even realize she was giving. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "Then tell me the whole truth." Her lips trembled, her eyes fell, and for a long moment, silence hung between them until she whispered, "You won't believe me." He shook his head gently. "Try me." She closed her eyes, gathering courage from a place deep inside her scarred heart. And when she looked at him again, she wasn't just scared. She was broken open, revealing memories she had buried under layers of survival. "I wasn't the first to escape," she whispered. "There were others. Older kids, braver kids. Kids who tried to fight them. Kids who thought someone would save them if they ran far enough." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "But every time someone escaped, they were dragged back. Punished. Sometimes they came back quiet. Too quiet. Sometimes they didn't come back at all." The billionaire felt cold prickles rise on his skin. She looked down at her hands, at the bruises covering her wrists, whispering shakily, "They made us work, every day. No school. No sunlight. No names. They gave us numbers instead. I was number 27. She said the number like it was carved into her bones. "My brother was number 28. They separated us sometimes, but he always found me. Always hid food for me. Always told me stories so I wouldn't cry." Her voice softened, trembling with love and pain fused together. "He's all I have." She looked up at him then, eyes filled with years of suffering condensed into a single moment. "When I escaped the first time, I ran until my legs gave out, but nobody helped me. Nobody believed me. They said kids like me were lying for attention or drugs or money. So they sent me back. They sent me back." She broke into tears again, her voice choking, and the billionaire felt something deep inside him fracture. He had lived in a world of power, luxury, and privilege, a world where his money solved every problem he ever had, and hearing that society had turned its back on her, on kids like her, filled him with a quiet rage. She continued, voice barely a whisper. "The second time I escaped, I didn't ask anyone for help. I knew nobody would believe me. I knew they'd return me again. So I stayed hidden, stealing food, staying in abandoned places, doing anything to survive, but I couldn't leave without him. I couldn't leave him behind." She held the worn photo of her brother again, pressing it to her chest with shaking hands. "I told him I'd come back. I broke that promise. And now I don't know if he's alive because of me." Her tears fell fast and hard, her body shaking like her heart was splitting open, and the billionaire couldn't speak because he suddenly understood the weight she carried, the guilt she lived with every second, the fear that ate her alive. She looked at him again, eyes red and desperate. "If something happens to him, if they hurt him because of me, I don't deserve to live. I don't deserve anything." The billionaire felt a crushing silence inside him, a silence so deep it swallowed every word he could have said, because he realized something he had never once considered in his life. She didn't just need protection. She needed someone who cared, someone who believed her, someone who saw her not as a burden or a thief or a problem, but as a human being who had survived hell and still managed to protect the one person she loved. He reached out and gently pulled her into his arms, not forcefully, not quickly, just enough to give her warmth, and after a second of hesitation, she collapsed into his chest, sobbing as if she had never been allowed to cry before. He held her tight, his jaw clenched, eyes burning not with tears but with an anger so deep it felt like fire swallowing his veins. His voice came out low and steady, vibrating through his chest as he whispered into her hair. "You didn't break your promise. You're not done yet. I will help you get him back. I swear it." She cried harder, gripping his coat like she was holding on to life itself, whispering weakly, Why would you help someone like me?" And for the first time since he met her, the billionaire couldn't speak. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because the truth hit him too hard to put into words. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago." She stared at him, stunned, breath shaking, tears still sliding silently down her cheeks. And in that quiet moment, her broken heart pressed against his chest, her truth hanging in the air heavy and raw. The billionaire finally understood what her story truly was. It wasn't about a stolen wallet. It wasn't about an escape. It wasn't even about danger. It was about how the world had failed her, and how, in the middle of a crowded street, he finally saw the truth no one else bothered to see. It silenced him, completely. And in that silence, a promise was born. A promise that would change everything.